We're going to be talking about the Trump attack on the education department. We're going to be talking about the big strike in Los Angeles County, the United States and China's trade war and where it's likely to go, the whole issue of long supply chains and the idea of reshoring manufacturing back to the U.S., and if time allows us, an interesting comment about workers with less education relative to workers with more. So let's jump right in. Trump recently cut $1 billion, that's a lot of money, from the Department of Education in its program of giving grants for school mental health programs. This was $1 billion to allow school districts across the United States to hire and put into place mental health counselors to help the schools cope with the psychological problems that every single poll we know of indicates on the rise over the recent years. He cut it. This is extraordinary. We know, for example, that the pandemic has had long-lasting, upsetting effects on people's psychology, given how all of us had to cope. The cutting out of our social connections, the anxieties about being with others, and all of that. We know that we have had a spate of school shootings that no other country comes close to matching, and that those emerge in almost every case from serious mental issues. We notice that Mr. Trump is spending an enormous extra amount of money deporting immigrants, undocumented immigrants, many of whom have spent years working in the United States, being good citizens, paying their taxes, and all the rest of it. And let me remind you, as a teacher myself, if in our schools the following has begun to happen, and it has, that police people wearing ICE outfits go into a school or a community and yank people out of neighborhoods, families, communities that they've lived and worked in for many years, you can bet it agitates the young people, losing their friends, losing their neighbors, losing you fill in the blank. Of course, we need more psychological help for our students. You know what this shows? It shows something to cut $1 billion off of that budget. And already the schools are announcing they're firing the mental health advisors, trained people who were helping students through these kinds of crises. It shows that when an empire begins to decline, as ours is, the rich and the powerful at the top hold on to what they've accumulated, which means that the cost of the decline is offloaded off of the rich and the powerful, the corporations and the top 10%, and dumped on everybody else. Firing public school psychological mental health counselors is exactly that. Wow. You know what else it shows? It shows that when you have tried to convince white people, as happens so often in America, that somehow the government favors black people, it makes it easier to get white people to support cutting the programs that they need as badly and that they use as much as black and brown people ever did. Wow. The two big items Mr. Trump's budget just announced for 25-26 involve huge increases for the Defense Department and huge increases for deporting people. The money is going to do the very things that add to the mental health problems this cutback worsens. What are we doing in a society to function in this way? My next update is a shout out, a kind of recognition that something extraordinary happened for the first time in the history of Los Angeles County. 55,000 people went on strike Monday night, April 28th, last Monday in April. It was a 2-day strike to support the union's charges against the county. This is crucial. These workers include, just to give you an idea, the public mental health workers I just talked to you about, public works jobs, social workers, parks department, recreation department, all the public services that the millions and millions of people in Los Angeles County need and use all the time. What's going on? It's that same offloading of the costs. And I thought it was poignant when the president of the SEIU union that represents these workers made the following comments I'm going to read to you. This is a workforce, talking about the people who went on strike, this is a workforce that got LA County through emergency after emergency, the January wildfires, public health emergencies, mental health emergencies, social service emergencies, and more. And to the workers who did all the extra that the emergencies always demand, what are you doing? Squeezing them, not paying them enough even to keep up with the inflation and the cost of living. You're not providing good services, you're exhausting your workforce. What a reward. What a recognition for all they've done. And when the union pushed back, they said, well, if we paid you higher wages, well, then we'd have to lay many of you off. That's called blackmail. You take no wages, or we will take away your job. You know who's doing that? Politicians who carefully avoid the other option, which is to pay the decent wages. And if you've overtaxed average people, which you have, well, then go tax those who have it, the corporations and the rich. We all know who they are, and we all know all the strategies that they successfully use to minimize, when they don't evade altogether, their taxes. Do something about that, politicians. Don't keep squeezing, because in the end, they will push back, and then we will be in a whole new place. I want to turn next, in the first half of this show, to the whole war between the United States and China. So far, it's just a trade war, although the word just misrepresents what's going on. The tariffs the United States put against China, and I want to remind everyone, the initiation of those tariffs comes from the United States, not China. China responds after the United States raises the tariffs, and China very carefully always responds with a raising of their tariffs less than what the United States did first, just to make it crystal clear to the world who's causing this. And of course, you all know that because the United States, under Mr. Trump, has levied a tariff against everybody in the whole world with very few exceptions. China has done none of that, hasn't put tariffs on anybody else, only retaliates to the United States because the United States initiates against them. Think about that. Well, what does the United States hope to accomplish? Well, the leaders of our country, from President Trump on down, state one fact over and over again. China sells more in the United States, a lot more, than the United States sells in China, although China is an important customer of U.S. exports. But the idea is we can win the trade war because China needs us to buy its stuff more than we need China to buy ours. Now, that's true. They do, in fact, sell more. But let me explain to you why the Chinese are acting very tough, responding, not backing down, none of it. What is it they know that perhaps you don't? So let me guess and tell you. China has been, for at least a decade, carefully cultivating economic, political relationships with its allies. It has made allies. The Belt and Road Initiative, all the Chinese investments in Asia, Africa, Latin America, the BRICS alliance, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and the 15 countries that they have brought in, including giant countries like Indonesia. China has a robust community encompassing more than half the people on this planet. That's why they're tough. They can shift and produce for those allies what the United States no longer buys. And they're doing that as I speak to you. And why does that make them strong relative to the United States? Because the United States, trying to cope with the economic costs of its declining empire, is turning on its allies and driving them away. A few weeks ago, there were elections in Canada and Australia. Two parties way behind in the polls, in the last few weeks, roared ahead and won both elections. Canada and Australia are allies of the United States. The parties that won had one basic idea that brought them from behind to win: anti-Trump, anti-tariffs. The whole world is shifting. China wins the trade war likely because of that. And the United States loses it likely because of how it's managing to not have an alliance when it needs one. And the Chinese have simply done that more. When you hear about China having rare earths that America wants, that's a small part of the story. The big one is the whole global economic change that has worked in the advantage of China and the disadvantage of the United States.